Dr. Richard L. Blake, what are people going to learn from this episode of Laughing Through the Pain, Navigating Wellness?
They're going to learn from Matt Soule about the Wim Hof Method. And Matt is not just a Wim Hof instructor. He teaches the teachers. He gives the tests, forklift driver tests, not the forklift driver test. He is a real expert in the Wim Hof Method, and he's a real expert in stress. And we hear a lot about misconceptions about stress, how people are framing stress wrong, why people are so anxious these days, and how that's related to their mindset.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think Wim Hof is almost like a buzzword now, and people just conflate a lot of things and they just chuck it in with Wim Hof, like being cold and breathing in a particular way without actually knowing much about what it is or what it's for. So to actually speak to someone on the inside of the organization who, is pretty senior in that organization is really helpful, I think. Because as with anything, when an idea runs away, you get a lot of kind of offshoots that are probably not particularly healthy or helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to learn some of the basics if this is new to you, what a minimum effective dose of cold is, how to do cold exposure safely, all the way up to the best ice baths on the market. And you're also going to hear about breathwork and how it can affect your stress response. And also we go behind the scenes of the breathwork industry and talk a little bit about the wild west of breathwork teacher trainings and what Wim Hof and their organization are doing to root out the inevitable bad actors in the breathwork space.
Exactly. And there's also some very useful day-to-day practices that you can get involved with to help get some of these benefits of Wim Hof without leaving your home.
All right. Enjoy, listener. Hey, everyone. Are you ready to kickstart your health journey and experience true transformation? Let me introduce you to a brand new program I'm thrilled to be a part of called Momentum, created in collaboration with Runga. Momentum is a 12-week immersive coaching program designed to guide you through every aspect of health transformation, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual. Think of it as the foundation you need to build a life of limitless energy, resilience, and personal power. Now, you might be wondering what sets Momentum apart. Well, the core of this program is breathwork, rooted in the clinical trial I conducted for my PhD. This trial showed breathwork's incredible ability to reduce anxiety with a large effect size and statistical significance, making it a true game changer in mental health. With Momentum, you get the best of both worlds. Live monthly breathwork ceremonies that allow you to experience these benefits firsthand, and a full library of recorded sessions. This means you can learn at your own pace on your own schedule from anywhere around the world. Plus, to keep you supported and inspired, we're including live support calls with our elite team. Momentum is about making you the best version of yourself in just 90 days, and Runga's expert coaching is designed to help you achieve exactly that. To get started, visit runga.co and join us in building the foundation for a healthier, more fulfilled you. The world is moving faster than ever. Don't wait to bring your inner world up to speed. Join today by going to runga.co/momentum.
Matt, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. Could you please start by telling us about your childhood experiences and how they motivated you to explore stress management?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were two incidences that really shaped my view about stress from an early age. One was a lot of the domestic violence that I encountered as a kid through an alcoholic stepfather. I can recall a time, one specific one, where my mom had a disturbance, a common fight that would happen in the middle of the night. And we were used to this kind of thing. We moved a lot as kids. We had police over at our house all the time, one of those kind of things. And in this particular incident, we were trying to run away from him being an attacker, this stepfather. And I'd held the door open for my mom and my little brother, who was a baby at the time, rushing through the door to try to get to the car safely in the garage. And my sister and I were lagging a bit behind. And my sister, pulled a knife from the butcher block to kind of hold him back at a distance, and it worked. And I can recall holding the door open to the garage and everything started to narrow and go black, which is common in an extreme stress response. And what motivated me to get out of that was a voice. It propelled me. I said, come on, let's go. And everything kind of came back online, and my sister and I got out of there safely. And that was a pretty strong memory that held with me through any number of years. I actually detail it quite a bit in my book on Stronger Through Stress, because it was incidents like that and others that really shaped my understanding of how extreme stress can play a giant role, even ones that were happening years ago, in terms of how they show up with anxiety and depression and any number of things that many people experience after encountering these and other like incidents. So that was one that really shaped it early on. Another was the death of my father as a teenager. So my father was a wonderful man, very respected within the community. And he died kind of unexpectedly of cancer. And that was quite hard. And so that kind of sent me into my early 20s with just a lot of grief, a lot of depression, and I didn't really see a way out of it. My youth was really comprised of pouring myself into sports to try to build confidence and connection, and that worked quite well, actually. It was a wonderful outlet, but it didn't resolve a lot of the anxiety that underlying sweaty hands going into any sort of difficult or challenging situation, and the feelings of sort of depression were always present. And so really what I was looking for is a way to get beyond that, right? To get to the point where I could have actual resolution. And what I found in my early 20s was actually martial arts. That was the first time, as I really delved into many of those practices, that I felt peace, that I felt that restored confidence. And it started to give me a lot of hope and inspiration that a new lens could be possible. And it started to frame my understanding about stress.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, Matt. It sounds, awful. And I really appreciate that story you shared. And I love how you reframed the trauma as sort of, part of your narrative in a healthy way, instead of just being the victim. Supposedly that is the best predictor of how people do later in life when they've had traumatic things, is whether or not they can use that as fuel, as you've done, or if they can just use it to feel like a victim. So well done for that. I was really interested by the fact that you said there was a voice that came to you when you had that blackout. What do you think that voice was?
I think it's probably a survival instinct. It's like you can't afford to pass out now. So whatever it is, like, let it come from the gut and pull it forward. And so the voice that came inside of me that knew it had to get out, it caused a lot of relief actually in that moment, and steered me back to an action state instead of getting to that point where you just freeze and you shut down, because I was very close to that.
Mm. And we haven't actually spoken much about martial arts on this podcast. Like, what do you think it was about martial arts that particularly resonated for you and gave you such a sense of hope?
Well, I think coming out of the early days of experiencing a lot of that domestic violence as a young child, I felt helpless, right? I felt incapable, and I had a lot of anger and resentment as a result. And trying to just do sports or these other things didn't necessarily make me feel less helpless, right? But martial arts is all about tapping into that fight or flight response in a very strong way. You have to negotiate 100 boundaries with different training partners in order to do it safely and to push the bounds of development. You really learn, actually how to fight and how to fight well. And you understand limitations, and you understand your own capacity and capability. You understand how to grapple with these base elements that are so central to our being, which is self and other harm, right? And so tapping into all of that, it was no longer a mystery. I knew what I was capable of. I could see it day in and day out. I also knew what the limitations are for most people. I understand how skill made a difference versus the non-skilled. I also understood the limitations of that, right? It's like all of those pieces sort of play a role to provide perspective and give sort of true understanding of that field. And as a young man, I really had a lot of questions. If I fought back, would I be able to control myself? Or did I have so much anger that I wouldn't? That scared me, right? Would I? So that means I've got to just push everything down because I don't want to let myself explode. Like that was a very disruptive thing and causes a great deal of anxiety and depression in its own right.
Mm.
So by having a positive outlet where you actually get to test these things and put yourself out there and contend with another human being, wow, so informative and so stress relieving, where it just gives you a sense of peace and empowerment. And I took that and I said, okay, this is something that I'm going to study for the rest of my life. And I know martial arts is a giant category, so I shaped it very specifically over time. But at the beginning, I was just looking for something that would help me find that sort of deeper meaning, both the spiritual side as well as the very practical nuts and bolts of how to defend yourself well.
Matt, that was really interesting what you were sharing about grief, because I had a lot of grief around it. In my sort of teenage years and 20s. I lost my father, all my grandparents in a relatively short amount of time. And I remember going to a Reiki session. I was at like a group Reiki share, and there was one lady there who was working on me. And at the end, she was like, do you mind if I share some things that I picked up from doing Reiki on you? She was just like, I spent a lot of time around your chest and around your lungs because it just feels like there's so much grief there. And I don't know if you've lost people, but it seems like you're holding a lot of stuff there. And it makes me want to, it makes me tear up a little bit just to share it right now. But that was about the time that I became a breath worker, became really interested in the breath. So I'm wondering if similarly, if this grief process that you went through was connected to your Wim Hof instructor experience.
Certainly. Breathwork is such a big component within the grief domain, just within anything that requires sort of that big acceptance piece. And specifically, the Wim Hof Method comprises really two tools. I mean, we can also talk about the mindset. That's the third one. But the two I'm speaking of is the breathing exercises and the cold, right? The cold therapy. So because your question was directed specifically around breathwork, let's start there. So one of the most impactful things that I've seen is finding that conscious connection deep through the breath and tapping into parts of the brain that allow us to really let go, right? Physically let go. So the Wim Hof method, for example, is comprised of a very strong inhale and a very passive exhale. And you do that through a series of cycles, 40 cycles usually is maybe a basic protocol. And so through those 40 cycles, you're practicing the physical act of stimulating an action response from the body, followed by a very passive letting go. So many times in our lives, we're told, just let it go. Let it go. But pairing that with an actual physical action cyclically is extremely powerful. And the inhale, which stimulates the action-oriented side of ourselves, is very impactful because it starts to interface with the limbic part of our brain. That's the emotion center. And when you tie lungs and brain together in that way, it can be truly profound. And so, yes, is the answer to your question. I think it's really impactful, and especially around things that are very difficult that people have contended with, and grief being one of them.
And so in terms of like linking Wim Hof to stress management, can you maybe describe a bit about what's going on there and how it does that?
Yes. The easiest way to think about it is that it's got two practices basically within the method that help us reframe our relationship to stress. One is the breathing cycles that I was just describing. They are sending us into an actual stress response. It's controlled, but it's on purpose. So we're sending ourselves into a big stress. And then followed by a breath hold, which steers us down into a rest response. So we're training the system to stress at a great deal and rest immediately following it. And by doing that, we get out of what I call stress recoil. That's where we put ourselves into this elevated stress state, but remain there for hours, days, weeks, months, years that break the body down over time. And so that's one of the best ways that it reframes it. Now, breath holds in and of themselves can be more than just a rest, variation. They can also be amplifiers in certain types of breath work. And in the Wim Hof method, they are certainly playing a role as amplifying the effects of both the stress and the rest. And so it becomes a very good practice to learn how to manage a good stress response and go deep, deep within a resting response and finding that duality within a single exercise. Within the cold, we're actually practicing getting into a stress response. Again, the cold water stimulates a very specific stress response through the cold. And in the path of that, we're trying to practice acceptance, that deeper layer of, I'm not going to change the environment around me, so I can only adapt and change myself. And that is extremely helpful for any number of circumstances we find ourselves in that cause us stress where we can't control the circumstances, the stress that we don't choose. But we learn how to show up differently. We should learn to show up with calm, with peace, and learn to breathe slowly amidst the stress. And so the breath work within the cold practice is very slow and controlled inhale through the nose and long exhales through the mouth, because we know that long exhales help stimulate that rest response in any given cycle. So we've got these two duality things that are happening where we're reframing stress with the body using these practices.
Yeah, I think reframing stress is such a battle. And I think the type of people in the world who think like we shouldn't have any stress are the people that need this the most. I feel like, there are types of people who think that, life should just be easy at all times. And we should, there's that story of the king who wants to walk down the beach and it's like a pebbly beach. And so he decides, right, we're going to make the whole of the beach leather. So it's smooth for him to walk instead of just putting some leather shoes on himself. And then, it's that saying of prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. Yes, we can do some preparing of the road, but ultimately life is always going to be stressful, and the more stress resilience we can have, the better. And when you in my environment, academia, there are people who think that like you should never hear a different opinion because a different opinion is violence, or they don't understand that having microaggressions and focusing on microaggressions is actually making people more anxious. And this mindset stuff is so important. It's almost like it's too easy. People are like, no, I don't want to just switch my mindset because that's too easy. It's too much of a low hanging fruit. I want something, bigger, grander. I want structural change. So I get quite frustrated at that mentality. But the Wim Hof method seems to be changing that for a lot of people. So yeah, misconceptions about stress. That's one example of a misconception of stress. Like we should just never experience stress, I would say, is a misconception. So can you tell us more about common misconceptions?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that, it's not just the mental reframe that's necessary, though it is. That's a very powerful thing, just setting our mind and having that acceptance that stress is guaranteed in life, right? So you're going to choose it. Which hard do you want to choose? Do you want to choose the difficulty of not being prepared to handle difficult times? Or do you want to put yourself in more of an empowered locus of control seat and, have some preemptive practices that allow you to weather any storm? Personally, I would like to choose the latter, right? I want to prepare myself because it makes a difference. But in terms of misconceptions, and this is a common one, anybody kind of thinking or hearing about the cold for the first time, they think, I'm already cold. Why do I want to go into the cold if I'm already cold? How does that work? And surprisingly, when you do that, when you actually expose yourself to these elements in a positive way, you're not cold anymore, right? You end up building, the body comes back stronger. It builds resilience. It builds, vascular strength, if you will. And now all of a sudden blood flow is easier. You physically don't feel cold nearly as much because you're exposing yourself to these elements in a dose that's beneficial. And so I think that's a big piece and a big misconception as well. It's like, if I don't want that, I better avoid it. It's probably the opposite. It's like, if I don't want that, I better dig into it and lean into it. I just need to make sure I do it in a way that has a proper dose, right? And so that becomes sort of the driving factor, is what's the right amount? And trying to figure that out sometimes for new people can be challenging, or even people that are training, it can be challenging. And so I'm happy to give your listeners some advice on how to do that. What are good indicators to determining if a stress practice is actually working in your favor or working against you? Because it'll go one way or the other, right? And we want to have some good information around that.
Yeah, no, carry on with that. Yeah, tell us more about dose.
So there's basically 4 indicators for any practice, and you can use it for your athletics that you enjoy, or your cold practice if you like to expose yourself to the cold or heat, if you love sauna. All of these things could be wonderful practices. Or fasting, that's another good stressor that's very popular in today's world, whether that's intermittent fasting or some of the longer duration fasts. But if you want to know if a practice is working for you, there's 4 times that you want to check. One is, how do you feel during the actual practice itself, right? So let's just take the cold water, for example. If I get into my freezer tub, which I love to do in the mornings, well, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to make the transition to a nice rest amidst the stress, and I'm going to check in. How do I feel? And I should be feeling good, right? I should feel that it's exhilarating, maybe a little challenging. That's all well and fine, but I should feel good. I shouldn't feel that deep ache, chill, trying to keep everything together, shattering and that kind of thing, just to tough it through. That's not the purpose of the practice. So I should feel good in that time. Number 2 is, how do you feel about 15 to 30 minutes after the activity? In the case of the cold, I should feel relatively warmed up, right? So my hands and feet, if I'm a new practitioner, might still feel a little bit cold, but by all means, I should feel basically recovered. I shouldn't, again, feel that deep ache and chill. I should feel pretty good, high energy, ready to go about my day. The next check-in is 4 hours later. So after 4 to 6 hours is where the body basically goes through a number of different, positive arcs. And in this case, we're going to have a big boost of adrenaline that comes from the cold, and it's going to sustain for about 4 hours or so. So you should feel clear, mentally clear is what I mean. You should feel energized. You should feel, by all means, pretty good. And then the last one is, how do you sleep at night? So a practice like the cold, or any really solid practice, martial arts practice, etc., should help you get enough of that physical activity out of the way that you sleep well at night. If you've got sustained adrenaline in the system, or you're feeling anxious, or you're still in a stress response because you haven't fully warmed up yet, in the case of this cold practice, well, that tells you that you probably overdid it, or you need to support your body, because it should facilitate sleep quite well. And so if you've got those markers, how do you feel in the thing? 15 to 30 minutes after, 4 hours later, and sleep at night, if a practice is working for you or not. If you're not recovering, you're going to get up in the morning, you're going to feel lethargic, you're not going to want to do it, whatever it looks like, and you're going to need extra rest time. So people are bound to make mistakes, but if you keep those things in mind, you can sustain a practice over time and have it keep serving you. And it gets us out of this mindset that more is always better, which is just not true.
Interesting. And if you could tell us a little bit about why people are coming to Wim Hof. Is there kind of the pattern that you're seeing, or is it just curiosity? People have tried other things and it's not working. What's going on for people there?
Well, I think you hit it on the head in terms of all of those reasons. So people are coming for their own reasons. Just to give you a quick makeup from the groups that I trained last week, I had one guy that was special forces. So he was a pretty serious guy, had done a lot of cold training as part of his, military training there. So he had been sent to Norway to do pretty deep cold stuff, but he found actually that this practice totally reframed how he looked at it. He no longer had to use it as this deep fight thing. It was actually a much more stress relieving exercise than simply this mindset of, we've got to build toughness in the body. And he said, I can sustain the cold a lot longer, a lot easier, a lot better. And you add to that some of the breathing exercises that go along with it, and he's able to get out of some of the PTSD and other things that he had experienced in wartime. So, super powerful. And contrast that for another lady, this woman, Sarah. What a beautiful woman, this just beautiful heart. She had been battling 6 different autoimmune disorders since she was a child. Stuff that ended up causing her limbs to dislocate randomly, and she wouldn't be able to walk at times or do all kinds of stuff. She at one point wrote down her list of things that she would love to do if she could, and one of them at the top was to do her own laundry. Like, that was her aspirational goal. And you can think about how low you have to be to make your aspirational goal, I wish I could do my own wash, right? So you can appreciate where this woman's coming from. And she had found the Wim Hof Method, and it was the only thing that put her on a path of higher energy. It was the only thing. And she was extremely skeptical when she was dragged to the workshop the first time. Fast forward now a couple of years later, and she's trying to be an instructor to share it with others. Right? So people come from this from all vantage points and so forth for their own reasons, but it's attractive for, I think, one big reason is that it's so simple, right? It's a very simple thing to follow. Cold water can be found virtually anywhere in the world. I do spend a lot of time in Mexico City, so I will say it's not everywhere because you can't find a cold shower there, and water is actually pretty scarce. And so there's some challenges to contend with. But for the most part, you can find cold water just about anywhere, if nothing else, in a shower. So it's accessible. And the breath work, of course, you don't even need that. So the breath work alone is something that can be done by anybody. And that's really powerful. And then it's a shift in mindset. It's this idea that we're willing to take more sort of that internal locus of control step and say, I can do something about how I feel in a positive way. And I can have growth in my mindset to say that I can do something, right? I don't have to just be bound by limiting beliefs that I have no control. And so when people find hope in that growth mindset, they're willing to step in and give it a shot. And when you get the results that you thought you were going to get, which is the vast majority of people, stick with it. And they tell their friends, and their friends tell their friends, and you try to coach your family and you coach everybody you love because, damn it, this thing works. It's pretty straightforward. So you like that.
Yeah.
And dose of cold, what do you recommend, prescribe? What's a minimum effective dose for people with cold exposure?
A lot less than people think. So I'll start
That's
there.
a relief.
Right? It's a lot less than people think. So a couple of things that I'll just mention. So if you've got water near, let's say near 0 or 1 degree Celsius or, 32 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit, well, then even inside of 20 seconds, you're getting a cascade of positive hormonal effects, right? You get the boost in dopamine, you get the boost in norepinephrine, you get the boost of adrenaline, all this kind of good stuff that happens. You get endorphins that are released, so you feel happy and pain-free and all this kind of good stuff. So that happens very, very rapidly in super cold water. And so the next question is did the practice serve you correctly in terms of, did you go inside the water and make this internal shift from a stress to more of a rest amidst the stress? So if you've done that, your practice is basically, you're good. So typically for a newer practitioner in quite cold water, even in water as much as, 6 or 7 degrees Celsius or 40, mid 40s or so for Fahrenheit, even inside of that, it's going to take newer practitioners sometimes 30 seconds or a minute or some even 2 minutes to make that happen, right? So that's really the practice. Go in there and make the shift. Once the shift is done, if you feel good, get out, do it again. Do it again the next day or whatever. You don't need to stay in there for 10, 15 minutes or something like that, which will almost certainly break the body down. Okay. So that's one. The other piece is that there was a great study that was done where a guy that hated cold, he didn't like cold, but he was a good researcher and he wanted to determine a minimal effective dose. And so he set up a couple of different groups and said, we're going to give for 30 days, we're going to give one group a cold shower for 30 seconds, another group for 60 and a last group for 90 seconds and compare the groups. And sure enough, all 3 groups improved all the metrics, and it didn't really make a big of a difference between the 30 and 90 seconds. They all improved their mood. They felt less pain. They had fewer sick days. They were more positive overall. So you look at that and you say, well, gosh, 30 or 90 seconds, that's no big deal, right? I can make that happen. And the answer is yeah. So you can make it happen. So I would say like just start there and just keep playing with it. I'm nearly a decade into the practice, and I've got a very, very strong practice because I lead people into some pretty epic settings. Like I've got a retreat that's coming up where I'll take people into the Alaska wilderness in winter, right? And it's an extraordinary adventure retreat. And I guide brand newcomers to that practice as well as very skilled and advanced practitioners that come along that trip as well. And so I need to be really in my element when I guide people into that space. And so I've got a very strong practice. But even me, most of the time, I'm in cold water for, let's say, less than 3 minutes in a given day, right? I'm not spending eons in the cold water. It's not necessary. Now, if you ask me to go out for an extended period or go into deep cold, I can do it. My body's ready to adapt. But in terms of the baseline practice day to day, I just try to make it feel good. That's the point, And so I would just suggest that you don't have to keep pushing, even if you're looking for a long-term practice that'll continue to pay you dividends.
And it sounds like this is very much a morning practice to take the full benefit of the adrenaline and 4-hour sustained adrenaline.
Yeah, so you can approach it two different ways. The primary way is, yes, early in the morning is typically going to be best, or early afternoon, depending on what your training schedule is and what specific adaptations you're looking for. But usually first half of the day is going to be ideal. And for many people, they're going to find the best just to include it in their morning cold shower, in the morning shower at the beginning of their day. It's going to be the easiest to include. The exception to that is if you've got sauna present. So if you can do contrast therapy, which is fantastic in its own right for 100 different reasons, you can do that at night. And what's going to happen is actually going to facilitate your body giving away heat in a very good way that's going to help you sleep better at night. That's going to work along with the melatonin that we produce. That's going to lower core body temperature in order to get us into sleep. It's going to help us with sleep pressure in the middle to help us stay asleep. So there's lots of good reasons. And so cold can be certainly included along with heat in the evening. Very few people can sort of get around that exception, but I'll steer you there.
That's how I do it. Yeah. Sort of end of the work day, just before dinner, about 5, 6 o'clock, sauna, ice. And that I find it really relaxes me. If people want to get started, so going on to like models of ice baths, you have your freezer. Mm-hmm. What do you recommend to people? Because I've just come across this thing. It's called I'm looking at it on Amazon. It's called an ice shower, and it's just an attachment that you put on your shower head, and it's like $20. And I think that's a way for people to start. So if people want to start with that, or what other suggestions do you have, and what's your favorite model for people who want to spend a bit of money on it?
Yeah, so that there's a range of budgets that are available, or a range of products for every budget that are available these days. The ice shower, that's a really good little thing. You've also got some of these new chillers that'll pop right into your bathtub that aren't terribly expensive. So that can be a really easy one as well, if you prefer a bath rather than a shower. Some people struggle with, feeling like the shower is constantly hitting them and they're having trouble to adapt to it. I'll tell you that if you can get past that initial discomfort, you can build sort of that wetsuit effect that actually feels pretty good, but that's just my piece. I know we're going to be different. But so if you like a bath, you can get one of those external chillers, and they're a couple $100 these days is all. And so they're not terribly expensive. Other people I know that live in more cold areas, they just set up their baths and they put them outside and they break through the ice, for the morning. And so most of the year, it's going to be cold, and at some points they may have to actually heat it up a little bit. So depending on that, but those are cost-effective ways, and it can be even as simple as like one of those sort of Japanese ofuro type tubs that are vinyl. So less than $100. If you want to spend a little bit more money, then the chillers that are on the market these days, there's a good range. Everything from some of the aquarium chillers that are going to run about half the price of a more marketed cold chiller for ice baths. You're going to probably pay double, triple, or quadruple for those. And there's some reasons for that. I'm not suggesting there's not. Some of them will go heat or cold, which is nice, and they're pretty robust. But you can have options along those lines. Some of the top brands that I think are doing a pretty darn good job, Gosh, Renew's got a pretty good one. I mean, that bat's quite expensive though. If I'm not mistaken, it's probably $14,000 or $15,000, but it makes its own ice and, it's pretty remarkable. You've got Plunge, that product. It runs, anywhere from, I think, $6,000 to as much as $12,000, depending on the unit. So these can get quite pricey. But if you're looking to spend money and you like the elegance and the look and you want it to be serviced for any number of years and guaranteed, these can be wonderful products for those that are interested.
Yeah, I have to give a shout out to Monk. I don't know if you come across Monk ice bars. I just invested in them, crowdfunded them. And I think they're doing a good job. I think they're kind of mid-range, sort of $5,000. And Anthony Joshua, the heavyweight champion or former champion, is an investor as well. So he's sort of the front man of them. But I really think Monk are going to be
must be pretty big then, Rich.
Gap. It is big enough to fit Anthony Joshua in. Yes. So yeah, it is. Okay, great. Well, going on to breathwork. So one of the things I kind of mentioned is like, in wellness, I think there's a kind of idea that just more is always better. And, like if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I, as part of my PhD, looked into sort of the dose responsive conscious connected breathing and found there was no difference between people doing one 90-minute session per week and people doing a 90-minute session plus doing conscious connected breathing every day in terms of anxiety. And as someone who's just finished with the Oxygen Advantages advanced training, I'm very interested in CO2 tolerance. So one rumor that comes out of the Wim Hof method is often when people start with the breath work, their breath hold time goes up, but then they do it every day for a year and then their breath hold time goes way down, their carbon dioxide sensitivity goes way down, and they experience increased breathlessness and some sort of negative effects. Is that true, that rumor?
Well, yes and no. So let's get into it because I think that's a wonderful question. One of the things, as we mentioned before about the Wim Hof Method breathing, is that it does steer us into a stress response. So you can imagine that if you overstress your body, if you're doing that too often, you're going to steer yourself into a more action-dominant state, on and on. And that in and of itself is going to reduce the time that you're able to hold your breath, right? It's going to elevate your heart rate and do some negative impact. And so the ideal practice within the Wim Hof method is one that allows you to stay connected, that allows you to raise the ceiling of tolerance within oxygen saturation, but simultaneously lowers the floor, which allows you to get into that more hypoxemic state and helps you deal with, oxygen deprivation and ideally, CO2 tolerance as well. So I think it depends on an individual practice. And I think the second reason that people struggle with that is as you do something over and over, your body's going to adapt to whatever it is. So that's a piece. And then mentally, we tend to check out, right? We're no longer as connected to a practice over time. So I think there's a variety of reasons why people experience that. But what I'll say is that as I work with people to slow their breathing rate down, and they start to get reconnected to a practice and include some variations that are helpful to restore connection, that those breath holds come right back and extend quite long. People that are really committed to their practice end up growing those breath holds substantially, and to the point that I don't even think is necessary in order to get the benefits of a practice. But for all sake, I just want to recognize that. So we're seeing a lot of different things, and I think there's a few different reasons that we see that. But what you mentioned can actually happen. So yes, that could be the case in some cases.
Interesting. I think you said you've been practicing for 10 years, Matt, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And in that time, I'm sure you've seen the Wim Hof name and brand grow almost exponentially. Does that come with a few kind of, I guess, rogue practitioners or people kind of trying to piggyback off that name? I don't need you to name names, but is that something we're seeing?
No names.
Yeah, no names. Yes, of course. Certainly, that happens. The Wim Hof method, it's got it's grown very substantially over the last, 10 years. When Wim was first starting to take people to Poland, there was 4 or maybe 6 people that would attend a retreat, right? So now there's multiple weeks of 80 to 100 per week. And then most recently, they started to put them back into 1 week, but at a new hotel, and it's huge for that particular week. So a lot of people are practicing, and it's a growing practice. And, that's going to cause any number of people to either piggyback on, latch on to it, shift how it's talked about. And, even the Wim Hof method itself has grown quite a bit and changed its view on several things over the course of the decade. So I think that's important to recognize as well, because what was taught when I first joined, I was part of the first group of US instructors. I began to train people in the academy in 2018. And so I've trained, 7 years. I'm going into my 7th year of training instructors. And, at the beginning, we didn't have the same curriculum or even close to it in the same practices that we do today. And so a lot has shifted over time, and I believe for the most part, very positive direction.
Can you say more about what's changed in the Wim Hof method? What do they change their mind on?
Okay, yeah. So early on, it felt much more like the Wild West, right? So Wim is very much a practitioner, a master at what he does, but very much a practitioner and not so much a teacher, right? So I wouldn't call Wim Hof a teacher per se in the traditional sense. His teaching style is by demonstration and encouraging people to explore their own personal limits. And sort of breaks that limiting belief inside many people that allows them to really access the deepest parts of themselves and get curious about what they're capable of. And in that sense, he's a teacher, but in terms of like nuts and bolts and describing many of the different aspects, that's not his skill set, I would say. And so some of the things that we had tried early on we're pushing our bodies in any number of ways pretty hard. A lot more breathing, perhaps, than we needed to do, right? In terms of the nuances of how to breathe, they weren't really talked about. Wim is kind of famous for saying, I don't care if you use your nose or any hole, just get it in. I'll just put it that way. Is kind of how he puts it, right? Kind of crass and crude. And that's not necessarily fully accurate. What he's trying to do is simplify it so that people don't get in their own way, right? But that's not terribly helpful if we're actually talking about how to instruct people to breathe, both for that exercise, but more importantly, breathe throughout your life, because the Wim Hof method says nothing about how to breathe through the rest of your day. It's only a specific set of exercises. And I think people conflate those two things. They're like, you should always breathe like this. That would be insane. Like that's not good for you to breathe as we do in the Wim Hof method breathing exercises throughout the course of a day. But if you do your exercises properly, then you're going to actually improve your breathing a lot down the road. And so over the years, we've really tried to instruct people how to show up in life better, or at least that's been what I've tried to do as a teacher. I'm one teacher out of several, and obviously there's a lot of people that practice throughout the world, but just trying to help people really understand the difference between particular exercises that should be done in a part of the day and how to breathe throughout the rest of your day and through the rest of your performance or any other things that require, sort of a shift in breathing.
Yeah. And so I guess, what are you doing to ensure that the high standards are met and maintained during your teaching instructors?
Yeah, only that I can do on my weeks, so I'll take that responsibility to the extent that I can do myself. What I try to do is really understand all the different parts of breathing. So the most common problems that I see in today's world where we discuss this topic is that most are taking a very thin slice and trying to suggest that's the whole. And that's not really the case. And so I've really tried to read as many studies as possible about breathing, about oxygen saturation in both tissues and in the blood, why things change, the difference between conscious active breathing and pathologies, right? Because most of the studies that are done are actually pathological based, meaning they're trying to address a specific condition in a hospital setting or an acute care setting, or for nurses to understand how and when to intervene on a patient's behalf if they're in distress, even though they may not present as such. So a lot of studies are around that. And I think we sometimes will also cause a lot of confusion around the differences between internal and external respiration. And so my job over the last decade has been to dive into as much of the literature as possible, as much into the medical information as possible, the physiology and so forth, and just do that to the extent that I can, and then back it up and also do applied breathing stuff. So I had some of the early devices that were reading SMO2, for example, that's muscle saturation, oxygen saturation in the muscle, as well as your blood saturation, oximeters. And I was performing any number of experiments. So, for example, I did these things at sea level. I did them during martial arts classes. I did them at rest. I did them on extreme altitude as I ascended Kilimanjaro in 33 hours and change, right? So adapting from sea level with no other means other than a breathing method to support me and track the data while I did it, right? For me and 6 other guys. And so I'm a very data-driven person. And I would say in that sense, I'm quite unique in my position because I don't steer into some of the discussions or ideas that are always purported from the Wim Hof Method. I would say I steer away from some of that because I like to see data and have it supported very clearly. And also understand that, like, what are the actual mechanisms behind each of these things and why they may work. I want to know the reason why. And so that's been my deep dive. And then I carry that information forward and try to do my best to train the instructors to really understand it from that point of view. I would say that's the responsibility I carry.
Yeah, that's great because I'm affiliated with the GBPA. I don't know if you know them, but they're more, it's the Global Breathwork Practitioners Alliance, is more to do with conscious connected breathing, and they're trying to maintain standards of practitioners and facilitators. And as you said, Wild West, that I think everyone thinks that all breath work is the Wild West. And it is, because it's so hard to monitor practitioners and it's so hard to monitor people who are not even practitioners. You know, then they've just done the Wim Hof method from the app and then they go out and teach people. Same with conscious connected breathing. Face palm. Absolutely. It drives me mental. So the GBPA is obviously doing something. Wim Hof is, the whole method, I guess, is the biggest breathwork organization in the world, certainly bigger than the GBPA and Breath Guru, who I teach for. So you say you're trying to monitor for your week, but is there scope for the Wim Hof methods to really be policing its own staff, raising those standards? Because you mentioned you were teaching 73 people at once, and I'm teaching on the Breath Guru conscious connected thing, and we've decided 6 is the maximum we can teach at once. Conscious connected breathing is more about, it's more like a therapy. So you do need to go more into holding space for people. But yeah, can you say more about what Wim Hof and the organization are doing on the standards?
Yeah, I think what they've done that's a positive is that they continue to add to their programming and change their curriculum and make it more robust. And if you were to ask me, how do I personally feel? Have they met the highest standard that they should? No, that would be the short answer. But they're making improvements on a regular basis. And so I have to commend them on that side, right? I think that when we look at 73 practitioners, and again, that was just for 2 weeks. I had 40 in 1 week and 36 in the next. So I think total of 76 actually this last couple of weeks. But those people have been working and training for most of them close to 9 months, right? So it's not something that happens just in the last week. I just meet with them their final week in their master module to basically get them through that last bit. And so I've got my small amount of influence and amount of teaching that I can do in that time. And the rest of the responsibility is through their other modules that they go through to learn some of the material to learn about the studies, to learn how the breath practice, how it's impactful, what's the actual protocol and why we do it and so forth. And then my week is really about clarifying a lot of that and pushing them forward. And what I see in 5 days of their master module is pretty remarkable. And I feel like that's about the best I can do within the framework that's offered there. Well, do I wish that I had those people for 9 months myself? 100%, right? Do I feel like we could do more? Yes, 100%. And as I mentioned, I feel like what I do is I give the notes back to the organization about what I see and how I feel. And I've seen them make really positive changes as they go forward. So that's a good thing. Many of the top teachers, the lead teachers, are certified in more than one type of breath work. I think that's helpful because it gives them a little bit more perspective outside of a single practice, which is good. And so I think that's a benefit, but I think we can only do what we can do, and that's what we're doing right now.
Yes. Well, I don't want to grill you too hard.
No,
I'm
it's
sure
good.
I know you
I love it.
have good intentions, but what we're doing at Breath Guru, and my wife is doing her master's in psychotherapy, and as you probably know, psychotherapists have to have supervision. You know, she's coming towards the end of her master's. She'll be let out into the wild with practitioners, and she'll have to go to regular supervision until she gets sort of 3,000 hours worth of training. So I think for breathwork, supervision from the schools is something that maybe we should look at. But is there any supervisors out there for Wim Hof Method instructors?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, there's a lot of people that are trying to do their best in terms of looking at instructors that are out there. And there's a large community that people can ask questions if something's not going well. We try to have a number of resources to continue to educate people within that framework. And so I think within that side of things, there is a help. And if people are doing something reckless or sort of off the bounds, as soon as we hear about it, or the organization, I should say, because that's really their responsibility, does try to intervene and help people to pull back. What does happen, I will say, is that not everybody continues to renew their certification and carry on. Not everybody continues their education. Some people are looking for a certification to really do their own thing, but they want to have a piece of paper that allows them to get business. And so maybe the intent is a little bit different in some cases. And those people are really looking to do and explore their own practices and their own styles that really has nothing to do with the Wim Hof method. So I think that happens as well. And that's pretty hard to police, if you will. But I think for the vast majority of people that are part of it, nobody's really looking to do harm. Everybody's looking to do their best and to hold space for people and guide them in a positive experience. I would say that's the overarching goal in most cases. The vast majority, right? The people are well-intentioned. It's like with anything, though. If you don't remain curious, if you don't have a broader perspective, if you don't continue to build and reinforce a strong foundation within your own practices, you don't know what you don't know. Right? And you'll never know what you don't know, but you're going to be limited in your ability to assess potential issues or to really understand and how to care for people throughout an arc of a breathing practice. And breathing is extremely profound, right? It can be life-altering, life-changing, both in the moment and going forward. And so the responsibility that we have as breath workers, as people that are helping people in this way, is tremendous. And to look at it otherwise, I think, is a grave mistake. And so one of the things that I try to do is just communicate that for the people that I am specifically in contact with, and to say, keep curious about your practice. Keep curious about it in general. Let's not try to just glub onto something to assume it's the end-all be-all truth. And how can we actually know that we're caring for people in a proper way to make sure they're not getting damaged from the work that we're doing, that we're actually facilitating a positive, life-changing experience that it can be.
Wow. So what's next for you then, Matt?
So what's next? Well, I've got some things that are on the horizon that I've been working on. So typically I would be holding any number of events. I do a number of different types of events as my personal brand. I guide people in the cold, of course. I run a martial arts school to help people in that sort of area. And then I do a variety of breathing events, and one of which is the vibrational breathing experience. So that's always been a lot of fun, and that steers people to the psychedelic using their breath. And so that's really powerful and positive that I've been playing with the last couple of years. But I've actually been working on a new project that I hope to be international with starting in the new year. So if you look on my website right now, you'll only see Alaska posted, and that's on purpose. So if you want to join something, come to Alaska. I'll guide you through there. It's a wonderful deal. We get 4 days of really beautiful, intense breath work. We'll eat some of the finest food made by private chefs. We'll get into the Alaskan waters, both the frozen waterfalls, and we'll cut holes in the ice and be in the sauna. I backpack saunas on site. We sleep in a great Airbnb group home, and we just share community, and it's fantastic, right? 4 days of just wonder. But that's all that's up there right now, instead of the typical month-to-month events. But I hope to launch my new project in the first of the year, and I look forward to that.
Okay. When is the Alaska trip?
Alaska is February 5th through the 9th this year. February 5th through the 9th.
Exciting.
Yeah.
So this is a secret, the next thing, is it?
Yeah, I got to hold it back for now. It'll be a big project, but it has to do with a lot of the things that I've been working on within the stress tools that I share with people to manage their stress and to leverage it to live their best lives. But I got to hold that back for now because I've got 1 or 2 things that are still on the horizon that I have to button up before I can announce that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome.
But stay in contact. You can go on and get a free membership on my website, and you can be privy to the announcement as soon as it's made.
And the website name
is mattsoule.com. So my last name is Soule. So mattsoule.com, and you can find all the information there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And congratulations by beating my Kilimanjaro time by 7 days. That's pretty impressive, if nothing else.
Wait, how long did you do it in?
I think it took 8 days.
8 days? Okay.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, man. It's great scenery.
I did it in 5 days. 3.5 up, 1.5 down. You were 6 up, 2 down or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
33 hours is serious.
It was pretty fast. It was pretty fast.
Were you running?
So on the way up, no. On the way down, I ran. I ran pretty fast. Okay. But on the way up, no, we just hiked and we spent 1 overnight, as part of that. So you go up, midway, and then 1 overnight, and then we push to the top to get our time there. It's pretty fast. A wonderful experiment. Really, I was motivated by breathing and how it was impacting, different breathing protocols, different breathing styles, whether we were using the nose or the mouth, how we use that, to what extent is each relevant, and really tried to inform my understanding of breathing physiology in real time, especially as we steered into extreme altitude. It becomes pretty important. I document all of this in Stronger Through Stress. There's a great story that goes along with it. That's my book that's out on Amazon. So if you're interested in learning more, you could definitely read there.
Awesome. Okay. It's been a great pleasure having you on. Yeah. You're obviously so knowledgeable and clear on your mission. That's great to talk to you.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know about you, but I was totally blown away by the introduction there. Such a moving story. And so eloquently spoke, but what a example of turning some serious adversity and traumatic events into something so positive.
Yeah, I think that's such an important reframe. I think there's a lot of the idea that if something bad happens to you in a childhood trauma, then your life's over. You're a dud. You've got no chance. But actually, there are so many people who recover from trauma, and actually it fuels them, it propels them to things that perhaps they wouldn't have done if they did have just a very safe, normal, uneventful life. And I think maybe it was Bessel van der Kolk, one of the trauma people, says, I worry less about the people who have had childhood trauma than the people who have never experienced any adversity. And there's some amazing statistics, like in Encyclopedia Britannica, 97% of the Encyclopedias Britannica's most most notable people of all time lost one or both parents before the age of 14. So certainly there are positive consequences to having tragedy such as losing a parent or other terrible things.
And I really enjoyed his story through martial arts and really kind of going into the discipline of it and finding that peace within martial arts and then within breathwork. And it's very clear that he maintains such high standards, which is encouraging for anyone who wants to get involved in Wim Hof.
Yes, the standards in the breathwork industry are a recurring theme on this podcast. But yeah, it's the first time we've had someone from Wim Hof, a different methodology to the one that I teach, but a great one nonetheless. By the way, listener, I love Wim Hof. I've done a lot of it. I've met Wim and I really like their technique and what they're doing for the world. Just one disclaimer that we should throw in here. You never want to do breath work, breath holds, hyperventilation in water because you can pass out. And people have died from doing Wim Hof breath in ice and in swimming pools and things like that. So yeah, it's really important that if you're doing breath work, it's not the aggressive, conscious connected. It's not soma. It's not voluntary hyperventilation or Wim Hof.
And to end on a slightly lighter note, were you surprised by how much he'd beaten my Kilimanjaro time, or does that feel about right?
It seems probably right. Yeah.
Okay.
No, that is amazing because when I did Kilimanjaro, they were really like trying to slow us down. I think there was partly like, you've paid for 6 days and maybe we could get you to 7 and we get you by the day. So can you just slow down? Whereas we were trying to walk quite quickly. I was like 19. I was doing it with my friend Moley. Shout out to him. He's a listener. And yeah, we were walking fast and they were trying to go slow. So I think we probably could have done it quicker if we wanted to, but or maybe
33 hours is outrageous though.
Yeah, it is. That's silly money.
So where do they find us, Rich?
They find us at Andy Esam on Instagram, at The Breath Geek on Instagram, and on my website, richardlblake.com and thebreathgeek.com, where you can find out more about me, the podcast, my breathwork practice, which you can now sign up for sessions with me one-to-one online, or if you're in Walnut Creek area, you can come for in-person sessions as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, listener. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.